everyone. Welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. It's good to be with you digitally, online.
I'm like, who are you looking at?
I'm looking at the camera.
I'm like, are my kids there? I'm like, wait, what? I don't see anybody.
It's the people, Scott. The people are right here.
Hi, peoples.
Yes, hi. It's good to be here.
It's too early for this.
Yeah.
It's not true.
No.
It's like 11 o'clock at night.
It was a busy weekend, though.
Yeah, it was.
There was a lot going on.
Yeah, it's all right. It's good.
Yeah.
I just like things like this.
Yeah, I'm sure.
How you doing today?
I am tired today. It was a busy weekend.
It was a busy weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of time to actually rest.
Yeah.
It was more like crashing on the couch between things. That was what the weekend was.
Yeah.
That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, some days.
Yeah.
Some days. But, we keep on kicking.
Keep moving.
We're like a fish out of water. Like, we just flop around
until we die. Just flop around enough till we die.
Or land back to the pond.
Yeah. Well,
and then we got great stories to tell.
So after last week's conversation about our about living in a pluralistic culture, ministering and living our faith in a culture where everyone won't agree with us. And we to recap a little bit, we talked about how that was a good thing, how it was a positive thing, and we shouldn't have the expectation that everyone, regardless of faith tradition, has the same exact view about everything.
Sure.
Because that tends to become the thing that people gather around rather than gathering around Christ. Mm-hmm. So when we make those secondary issues or tertiary issues or social issues like that, the most important criteria, or even a criteria at all, it tends to weaken our faith and then the faith of the groups around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So today
I just want to watch you see where you go from there.
I'm giving you opportunity to speak. If you're not going to,
no,
I got plenty to say.
I was like, hey, listen, I got ideas. I came today with notes, man.
Yeah.
Watch out.
So today, we thought as a good follow-up to that would be, in light of not everyone agreeing.
Yeah.
How do we process that? How do we disagree well? How do we maintain unity without the goal of uniformity?
Sure. I think if I was gonna the short answer, I think it really comes down to our spiritual well-being as individuals.
Yeah.
It comes down to our faith and intimacy with the Spirit rather than just because when all of a sudden we're not being shaped into the formation of Christ, then I think we're what do we look like? We look like ourselves. We become more,
or like the group that we gather around.
That we want around, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about Philippians 2, it says, do nothing, 3 and 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And I think that framework, because we talk about the humility of Christ when he came, set aside his glory, set aside his power, and came humbly, right? And we're supposed to image Christ. We're supposed to reflect that. Then the way we interact with others isn't about us having to be right. It's about what is best for that person. And I think where that gets really, where I think people may go, well, yeah, what's best for them is to do what I think they should be doing or what I think Scripture calls us to do, right? But there is a humility that's supposed to be that Christ carried that we should also carry as his followers, and the way that we engage and interact with other people that we disagree with. If we want to disagree well, then we're going to have that humility. We're going to have that capacity to say, I may disagree with you and I'll engage with you because I value you more than your opinion. I value you more than the distinction or the difference in us. And if we keep that at the central point, then I think there can be unity without uniformity, because we recognize where everyone is at, that it doesn't have to be exactly where we are. and that we can still engage with each other, even in debate or disagreeable areas of life, and still be looking out for each other's well-being. I think that at a fundamental level or foundational, if we are not being formed into Christ's likeness and his image, then disagreements lead to like church splits. Disagreements lead to isolation, rather than...
And radicalization, too, polarization.
You demonize somebody rather than actually just disagree with them. So, and I think that's where when it's about ourselves or about the need to be right, then all of a sudden that's where it goes sideways. You gave me a little bit of a heads up this week and said, like, hey, I think we'd like to go this. I was like, well, where are places in Scripture where we see people where there was potential disagreement where maybe it didn't work out, or where it did work out? And I think of Acts 15, where
the Jerusalem Council is like one example of where I felt like people applied that principle of like what's good for you.
Where we saw that, like, they called a council because not everyone was agreeing, but it was a big deal because they're looking at all of these Gentiles, all these people outside the Jewish faith, coming to follow Christ, and they're saying, should they become Jewish then? Is that the goal here? And so they all had to get together and actually decide if this was, because it's a gospel issue too.
It really is. And I think it's also, you don't have to necessarily go to Scripture to find places where people didn't agree well. I spent enough time in churches growing up watching churches split and watching churches
there's
divide over
disagreement.
It's very easy to, and often it wasn't over gospel issues. It was more over secondary issues. It was more over, maybe not liking leadership or not liking certain people or disagreeing with a stance that somebody took in leadership of the church. And so all of a sudden you watch a church become a place where the goal is not what's best for each other, not valuing one another over each other. It's like this is my conviction. And it's not to say that you don't have convictions, that you don't have opinions, or you don't think about things, but it is to say what's better for that person, for me to be in a relationship with them, and for us to continue encouraging growth, or for me to go, we disagree, so we can't be together anymore. We can't be friends anymore.
Well, I think what you bring up is so critical as we think through this, that you're looking at the person as an individual. And saying what is best for them. But it's not, now let me go to the other side of that, because the argument that I have heard growing up, well, what is best for them is if they do what I tell them to. So they're living in sin, or they're making decisions like this, or they have the wrong view on a social issue or whatever. So what is best for them is if they agree with me. That's essentially what it comes back to saying. But so not to say that, but to say, how does the relational connection remain? How can we continue to engage in loving discourse, not for the purpose of changing each other's minds, but to treat each other as image bearers of God? Because what is best for the person is not always just agreeing with me. That's ultimately a very height of pride and
it just leads to more conflict. Right?
I
mean, so like let's take it out of a church realm. If I respond to my wife all the time out of, the way to avoid this conflict is for you to just change your opinion.
Just agree with me.
Right? I mean, like just acknowledge that I'm right all the time. That's a marriage headed for divorce. Like that's a breakup. If we respond to family members, I'm not saying like in like crazy situations, but if we respond to people and just be like, listen, there's tension here right now, and the only way for this tension to resolve is for you to come to the realization that your opinion doesn't matter as much as mine does. And so just toe the party line, and we'll go back to normal. That's not normal. That goes back to the conversation from last week of that's not belonging, that's fitting in. That's as long as you...
That's uniformity.
That's just like, no, you can't be known, you can't be who you really are. You can't have open conversations and difference of opinions. You have to fit and check all of these boxes in order to be a part of this community. And that's not what we want. And so how do we set up a culture for the ability to disagree well? It means we look to each other and honor each other over ourselves. That's the humility that Christ demonstrated. That's the humility that that we see Jesus consistently trying to develop in his disciples, and being like, when they're jockeying for them to have the highest honors, he's like, it's not the way it should be among you. But that pushes back against a lot of our cultural values.
So how do we do that and still say, this is my conviction?
Sure.
Because people will have different beliefs on different subjects.
Sure.
And they're convicted that, well, this is right, this is the best way. And how do we engage with people of differing convictions while maintaining the love and the humility on our end, the love for them, and seeing what's best for us as a community?
Well, I'm curious to hear how you'll respond. For me, I think it comes down to our own spiritual formation and process. If we are being deeply shaped by the character of Christ in our lives, it should allow us to engage with people in that way. If we are not, if we are not being deeply shaped by that relationship, if we are in a community where we believe, if we're in a community where we believe that everybody has to have that uniformity, then we're not going to be in a place to engage with someone. So it's a mindset and it's a spiritual formation issue. The mindset, I believe, is that there's a lot of people that'll just like kind of say, well, everybody has their own opinion. If it's not hurting me, then then that's fine. I don't really care. That's different than what I'm necessarily referring to. I'm referring to like you being able to have a disagreement with someone, which means there's a humility that recognizes you don't have all the answers, and or that your opinions may be missing information that could help shape them more. And so if you lead with that curiosity, if you lead with that recognition that I'm still learning as well, that I'm still being shaped by Scripture, that I'm still being conformed into the image of Jesus, then maybe that person who I would disagree with, maybe there's a reason why they have that opinion. And instead of just being like, you're wrong, why have you come to that conclusion? Why have you, and if we're a community that is curious with each other, I think that helps us to not just like make people a caricature of a stereotype. But to instead be able to sit back and go, I want to know you as a person because I value you, and I believe that what is best for you is your formation into Christ likeness. Like, I can tell you what I think and why I think it. Can you tell me what you think and why you think this? There's an invitation that's there.
And I think that invitation invites people into a relational context.
And it's like the things that get in the way of that is when the things that get in the way of us becoming invitational and curious with each other and not just like pigeonholing differences of opinions into categories so that we can organize it in our minds. Like, I think that approach is like, it's prideful. It really is and those are things that, if we're honest, that's stuff that really the Spirit should be rooting out of our lives and we should be moving away from. To recognizing when pride comes in and to not use logical fallacies in the way that we approach other people. Because I remember 15, 20 years ago working in special education and really genuinely having good friends that disagreed with me about everything. But being able to have a conversation and saying, listen, I'm willing to acknowledge that you can have a difference of opinions, and I'm willing to like accept that. My fear, my concern is that my generosity towards you with your opinions is that someday you guys might not be as generous towards me with my opinions.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, so I think there's that ability to sit back and be like, how does that work in a friendship? How does that work in a relationship within a church? How does that work with outside of a church where there's a different foundation for stuff? Well, I think we come back to some of those principles like in Philippians. He doesn't just say that we should do what's best for the good of others in the church. He said we should do what's best for the good of others, like of all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because that's what Christ did.
What makes it easier for not putting up those not putting up those barriers, but what is it? How are we making it easy for people to follow Christ?
Yeah.
Because following Christ is difficult.
Yes.
It's not. It doesn't necessarily get easier as you go along, because there's more and more that needs to be, more comes up in your life that you realize, oh, these are areas I'm not following Christ on.
Yeah.
And so the conviction of sin in our life, like, oh, geez, I need to get rid of this.
Yeah.
But it's not like the conviction of, oh, I should stop doing this. Sometimes it's that, but more often as you grow in Christ, it's, oh, I'm not treating people the way I should, the way Jesus treated them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So there's more difficulty when you start to follow Christ. So I feel like that Jerusalem council kind of said, let's not make it even harder.
Yeah.
Let's not put more, ultimately adding to the gospel, let's not put more things that you have to do in order to follow Jesus, because it's going to be hard enough as it is.
Yeah. And I think some of those things that, like, if they had said, well, if in the little groupings of people, like if it had become about, like, if you're not engaging with someone individually that you think you may disagree with, but you're kind of like with a group of people that think like you, that siloing effect, where you're like, ooh, we call it gossip, right? That's kind of like, something that's frowned upon. And so if you're just bashing people without engaging with them, if you're slandering someone without knowing them as a human, then that gets in the way of being able to disagree, because they cease to be people at that point.
Yeah, it's that demonization of a group.
Yeah.
So you start to see anyone who has this opinion is no longer an individual person. They're now part of a collective.
Yes.
And because that collective disagrees with me, I'm allowed to not like that collective. And it's easy.
Yeah.
We really want things that are easy, like humanity as humans, we want what's easy. So we will just go, oh, you support this social issue, well, that means you're part of that group over there, and my side doesn't have to like your side.
Yeah.
My group doesn't have to like your group, and so I'm just great swaths of people rather than an individual who's an image bearer of God.
Sure.
Whether or not they believe they're image bearers is irrelevant. They are.
Yeah.
So you treat them with respect and kindness. But if you take away their individuality, if you take away who they are as a person and lump them in with a whole group of people, then you can demonize the whole group.
Yeah. I think as a society, we either let something fester without addressing it, or we have embraced conflict.
Yeah.
Like, we like the argument, we like the debate, we like the zingers, we like the...
It's entertaining.
It is. And so, but is that how the church should respond?
Right.
Like, and it comes back to, and that's why I think spiritual formation, why I think that our spiritual development as individuals is critical if we ever want to be people who disagree well.
Yeah.
And there are good people that disagree that wouldn't be Christians as well, but I think understanding the transformation of the gospel in our life, understanding the role of the Spirit in our life, understanding who Christ was, that's critical.
Yeah.
If we want to be a church that disagrees well, because we begin to realize it's not just about us having to be right.
Yeah.
It's about what is best for this person.
Yeah.
What is going to help them, take the steps necessary like to flourish.
Yeah.
And so that sometimes is, by its very nature, that means we have to be known. By its very nature, that means we have to do more than just fit in with each other. We have to build on a community that is transparent with each other and is willing to disagree. Because the disagreement opens the conversation for further transformation.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of disagreement, a lot of argument and conflict is based around fear. And I'm not sure exactly what the fear is. If I were to guess, I would say that the fear is maybe if I'm not loud enough, if I don't convince this other person that my conviction is right, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go because so much of our identity is wrapped up in our belief structure.
Yeah.
Whether it be theological or social and civic.
Yeah.
This is who I am, so boom, 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 and this is where I fit because I also fit within a community of like-minded people. And so if I'm wrong on this, or I give a little space to be wrong on this, where I have no moorings, I have no bounding, like there's nothing to keep my identity secure.
Yeah.
So I think that fear of losing an identity by having a conviction challenged is a really big one. And I remember when I was in a class hearing some students argue about a theological point and realizing how unconvinced both of them were on their theological point that they were arguing about. And it felt like they had to argue louder the less convinced they were.
Yeah.
And the others, there were a couple of students, like I was sitting with another guy and we both were just like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculous. And it wasn't like, I don't even remember what the argument was about, so I don't remember if I agreed with either of them or what. But we both looked at each other and just kind of shrugged and went, it doesn't matter if the other, like, I believe what I believe.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I have to argue about this.
Yeah.
And I also don't feel like I'm like 100% convinced that that it's true.
Sure.
I think N.T. Wright, I heard him say, I think it was N.T. Wright or Dallas Willard. I'm not sure which one. It could have been one of them quoting the other.
Yeah.
But they said, I believe that I am 85% correct, but I don't know what 85%.
85%?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, what a beautiful way to approach any subject with, is this the 15% that I'm wrong on?
Yeah.
Maybe. So let's have the conversation about it.
Sure.
Here's why I think this is true. Here's why I think this is how I should live this way. But give me your opinion.
Yeah.
Tell me why you think that you should live the way you're living.
Yeah.
If we can get away from the fear of being pulled away from our own convictions, or the fear of losing an identity if in case we're wrong, or the fear of one mentality affecting other things, like if we can just let go of that fear, I think that we would probably avoid a lot of real arguments, a lot of dissension, because a lack of fear allows for differing viewpoints, and it doesn't force everyone to have the same viewpoint, because you're not afraid of the other side.
Yeah, I think as you were describing that, I think of like Christ, like this, you'll be known by your love for one another. This is the command I give to you: love one another, right? And then what does love look like? Paul describes it as patient, it's kind. That it's not seeking its own.
It doesn't keep a record of wrongs.
It doesn't keep a record of wrong. It's not easily angered. All of that stuff. And so, if we are going to disagree well, we probably could even oversimplify it even more and say, if you disagree with someone, love them.
Yeah. Wow. Yep.
And then how do you love them? Is screaming at them loudly loving them? Is throwing a dig in loving them? Is mischaracterizing them loving them? Is just making a presumption of who they are and what they think about all issues loving them, right? If we're going to oversimplify how to disagree I would say love the person you disagree with, and then lean into that.
And if we can say, what does love lead you to? Like, how does love lead you to engage?
Do you prioritize the relationship over being right? Right? Do you love them enough that you can say, for me to love you is more important than me being right and you being wrong and you seeing that you're wrong?
I think that it's them seeing that they're wrong is it's the getting them to shut up, like getting them to stop talking. Like, I got you, I have won the argument. How many people have changed their minds because they lost an argument, because they had to shut up, because they were convinced, because the other side just shouted them down? How many people have changed their minds, have changed the trajectory of their lives and the way they function in life because they got shouted down?
I would say many less.
Probably very few.
Very few, many less. That's not even a phrase, but I'm like, less than I would think have had their mind changed because somebody loved them through the process. And I think we just have to keep that in mind. We have to be a people that, and here's the hard part, is in the heat of a moment when you're in an argument with someone, to go like, wait a minute, I need to love this person. I need to love like them. Loving them is more important than being right. But I'm really upset with them right now, or I'm really like angry that they're trying to take away from my rights or my whatever, right? And that's why it goes back to, what is our spiritual formation? What's the process? What are the rhythms of faith that we're doing that help rewire the natural response away from defensiveness to Christ-likeness? What are the patterns that we put in place that allow us to not have to be, right, but instead to be able to love that person and communicate what we believe, communicate our convictions, but to do it in a way that's respectful and in a way that invites further conversation?
I think that it would be good if we looked at every interaction and started saying, what's the outcome? What outcome do I want from this? And you really evaluate that. Do I want them to agree with me? Is that the goal?
Well, that's a good question.
Or do I want this relationship, this relational connection to continue? Do I want to have a substantive conversation? Do I want to know that person more deeply? Do I want them to know me more deeply? Those are different outcomes. And I guess when you talk about the spiritual formation, I think of the fruit of the Spirit and how fruit is nurtured. Fruit comes slowly. Fruit is something that isn't really up to you as a farmer, as the person who planted.
You cultivate it, right?
You cultivate it.
You work the soil. You might trim some things off that.
We planted. Our family has this cabin. It belongs to like the whole one side of the family. And we all try to take care of it. And a few months ago, we planted apple trees, and there's a bunch of apple trees on this property, and we planted some new ones, and we planted 6 last year, and nothing produced last year. They grew about 6 inches and had leaves on them, and that was it. And this year we planted some more, and I was just up there and like, oh, good, they've got leaves on them. And we're looking at these apple trees, and somebody said, well, maybe your grandkids will enjoy these apples.
Yeah.
and that, just to think about that the cultivation of an apple tree is years in the making before you see any fruit from it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes in seasons and it fluctuates.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a lot of fruit, and then there's a few years where they kind of back off and you don't get a whole lot of fruit on these apple trees.
Yeah.
So when you look at the natural movement of fruit on a tree, there's times where it's great, there's times where it doesn't grow too much, but there's a lot of time in between the planting and the harvest. If we looked at our spiritual formation as something that comes to fruition rather than an outcome that we have to control, that, okay, we're doing the system and therefore this is the outcome. So it should take 12 weeks, go through the workbook or whatever.
I got this now.
Yeah, that's our discipleship process, is a long cultivation for fruit to develop. Take that into this concept of disagreeing well. What I desire from the conversations that I have with people is the fruit of a relational connection to develop over time. I don't want them to just agree or disagree with my conviction. I may be convicted of something, and my mind's not going to be changed on it. Maybe 10 years from now, it will be changed on it. Maybe I learn more. Maybe I understand more. Maybe I study more and I exercise discernment in a different way that leads me to go, oh, I think maybe this is different. Maybe this is the way. But that's cultivation of fruit from a spiritual standpoint. That's not an outcome based on this argument that we had. So if all of our relationships kind of took that shift to, I want the fruit of this conversation to be relational connection, and I want to cultivate this relationship for the long haul over a long period of time and show love to this person and not live in fear and have this humility. Like, all of those things then build the community and build the relationship, regardless of what we believe about social issues particularly.
It's interesting. As you were describing that length of time, you and I, we've not had a lot of disagreements over the years, but we have had a friendship that's gone on for about close to 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
And there have been times where it's like, I don't know if I
I'm
feel
not
that
there.
same way, you know?
Yeah.
But the investment of the friendship has definitely, I think, I continue to be a better person because at least I have somebody that I can disagree with when something comes up. It's like, I'm not sure what I think about that yet, And so there's very much a processing together that I'm like, I value that because there's not a lot of people that I have that's just practically the things that we talk about over the course of, life. It's like, I never really thought about that. And sometimes you don't realize you disagree about an issue. And it may not be between us, but the conversations we have affect the way that I think about other relationships. Right?
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of things where, like, if I was afraid to be honest, like in my closest friendships, then I'm stunted in that growth, that growing process. And so it really does come down to not mischaracterizing or not hiding.
And there's a cultivation of trust and safety that comes from that. That longevity. And we've had those conversations with other people where you throw something out and it's like, how do they respond to this? Okay.
Is this a safe?
We'll
throw this one out and just see what they do.
Now we'll go a little bit further and see how it goes. And when a person
Test the water.
When a person responds strongly, you just go, that's the line. Okay. I still love them. But I don't feel that they're safe to bring up these things. I can't trust that they're going to treat my well-being with care. And so you back off. And so that relationship stays at the point of fear or stays at the point of mistrust. And you don't go any further with that.
Yeah.
But if you throw things out there and the response is, like you said, with humility, with patience, with curiosity, without judgment, without going, well, that's wrong, well, this is ridiculous, or I believe this and this is why you should too.
Yeah.
If it's met with those caution, care and love and curiosity, then I'm willing to put out more. Then I'm willing to start making more. And then I'm asking them, well, explain this to me.
Are they kind in the way? Is there kindness in the conversation?
Yep.
It's like, test the water. And you're right. If somebody's like, whoa, no, the language is harsh, it's dismissive, they're not really listening or hearing, they've just got an opinion they're in project mode. I usually will, I like to think of it as that person, they're only in transmit. They're not receiving any interaction. And so I've just learned that if somebody's in transmit mode, it's not worth trying to engage. Because there's got to be a back and forth. And so it's okay, well, if there's no interaction, then all right, I understand that dynamic of relationship.
There's a limit to the relationship then.
Yeah, but be kind. Don't dismiss them. They're still people. There might be a reason why that they're only in transmit mode. Maybe they've been hurt deeply by something, and so it's okay, well, again, that's that curiosity, that's that kindness, that's that love, that's that what's good for them, right? And maybe you can build enough of a relationship with them that they would be willing to maybe lower the guard a little bit.
Well, I have been amazed with how easy it is. I shouldn't say the word easy, but there's a consistency that when you ask a person who responds in that transmit mode, they kind of come on strong. When you ask the question about, oh, interesting, how did you get there? Why do you think that? What's the story there? When you show curiosity, it's like that guard goes down.
A little bit,
A little bit, And the more you
the
more you treat people with kindness, the less likely they are not to change their minds, but to approach you in a relational way.
It's funny from a pastoral perspective when you establish friendships with other pastors, and sometimes I go, I don't know why this person likes me, because I think there's enough theological differences. But there's a relational trust and a respect for each other that I'm like, it's a weird dynamic. But there are others that I just go like, nope. There's no relational trust that's there. There's no relational context. It's like, okay, well, I'm not like they're busy enough. I don't need to. I don't need to chase that. You know. And I think in our context as a church, more specifically in our role as pastors, at times it's like we have a very unique role in that what we model and how we engage affects the culture of the community where we're at. So for people who aren't in that type of role, I still think it's really important that they understand like what they model helps inform and shape the kind of interactions and community they're going to have. And there's always exceptions to that rule. But it's kind of like create the world you want to live in. You know, create the culture of trust you want to live in. That's not to say don't have boundaries. That's not to say don't, any of that. But begin the process of your formation into what Christ has called us to. Be devoted to Christ in that when all of a sudden, you're in a harsh situation. Okay, well, my faith compels me to love this person. My faith compels me to look for ways to be kind. Even if they're not in that moment. You are to be safe.
regardless of how they're engaging. You should be a safe person.
Yeah.
A person that they feel like, maybe they feel like they can be harsh with because they're not going to get smacked upside the head with another verbal caustic response.
Yeah.
And that will, like, that soft answer turns away wrath.
Yeah.
You know, that the way you engage de-escalates a situation.
Yeah.
So the kindness and the safety that you that you become as a person can then lead that whole conversation into a different direction, into a positive relational connection.
I wonder how many of us make it a regular pattern of prayer to pray about our responses and reactions and interactions with other people. Like, even because I'm like, I don't really, like, unless I'm going into a high tension situation.
Yeah, it's situational.
Yeah. But what about just the day-to-day? What about the daily interactions? Do we make that a pattern to say, Lord, help me to respond to people the way you want me to respond to me? Because, like, when the disciples asked Jesus, teach us how to pray, one of those is forgive us of our sins or our trespasses as we forgive those that have sinned or trespassed against us.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like,
whether or not they ask for it.
I'm like, whoa, hang on a second.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like, what are those things that move us into deeper intimacy with God and the Spirit? And be like, wow, wait. It would seem that relationships, even from what Jesus has communicated to the disciples, they matter.
Yeah.
And they matter for how they matter about what kind of connection we have with God. Like, if all you're doing is just super angry at people and super defensive about people and all of these things, is that really, is, like, at some point, does that generate the kind of care and compassion and kindness and love that Christ has called us to have?
Yeah.
And so that's that self-reflection I think you were talking a little bit about. That's that evaluation of, okay, how did that go? What
was the outcome?
Yeah.
What was my outcome? Like, what was the desired outcome of this?
What do I want to get at? Like, oh wait, well, like, oh, is it? I want them to see Jesus in me. I want them to see that God is alive and active in me. Or do I want them to see, how I think this is tearing apart the social fabric of our community?
And in that same vein, it's, how did I image God?
Yep.
How did I represent God in that conversation?
Yeah.
That's painful.
Yeah.
That's really painful to evaluate, did I represent Christ well? If the only image of Jesus that person ever saw was me, did I show them Jesus well? Some of that requires us to know who Jesus was. Not just a caricature of Jesus. But to really know how he engaged with people and what his responses were to people and how he dealt with sin in people's lives or how he dealt with people who disagreed with him. But that question of if I'm the only person that represented Jesus to them, did I do it well? And that gives pause. Now, the question that I think the question that comes to mind after all of this, are there areas that we need to disagree on? Are there aspects of life or areas in life where we say, okay, there's no conversation here. This is where I stand. This is the conviction that I have. If you're going to move in this direction, relational connection is not the goal. It is, I stand here, you stand there, and it's more than agreeing to disagree. It's like, we shouldn't connect. We're not going to move further in this friendship or relationship. Are there lines like that?
So I can, in light of the conversation that we just had.
That's why I asked it now, not beforehand.
I can tell you there are times where I have.
Yeah.
And usually those times come from when there is a drastic difference, and there is not a willingness to engage back and forth.
Yeah.
And so if someone, like, if someone has a worldview or a philosophy that is like opposed to what I see in Scripture or to what's there, if they're not willing to engage and they're only in transmit, then I have at times said, listen, I care about you, and I would be happy to talk about this if it was a conversation. But it's not a conversation. You're just telling me what you think, and there's no ability for me to actually like hear you.
Yeah.
Because there's like when I ask a question, you're not responding to me like I'm a person. And so usually in those points, I put up a boundary and say, until we can engage, then it's not going to happen.
Because those, I think a boundary is a good word to use. There are boundary lines for our own protection.
Sure.
For the protection of the community that we're part of. That those are times where you say, look, this is damaging me, or it's damaging others in the community, or there's the potential to damage others in the community. So that seems to be a good criteria, at least to look at. I can disagree with lots of things and lots of people and still love them. But if if the way you engage starts to damage
if it's harmful,
myself or others, then I think it's prudent to put up boundaries in those circumstances.
It's can we engage as people, or are we engaging as ideologies? And if you only engage at an ideological level, I don't think you're going to change a mind. I don't think you're going to be able to actually care for that person, because you're not addressing that person in the first place. You're addressing an ideology. And so I think in that sense, we've got to be able to move beyond an ideological like argument with someone. We have to be able to see them as people, to be able to engage as people, because we don't love ideologies, we love people.
And it goes both ways. Loving someone, showing kindness to someone, does not mean you become a doormat or a punching bag. There's a respect that should be mutual. And if the respect is not mutual, it doesn't mean you lower yourself to that standard. But you just have to say, I love you as a person, but if you're not going to respect me also as an individual, then this isn't going to go any further.
And that's I think that's a healthy approach to life.
Not
just disagreements. Like that's putting yourself in situations where anything, like we should have enough understanding of ourselves to recognize our boundaries, and what is harmful, and what is not helpful. And so what's the phrase? Healthy boundaries seem rude to people that don't have them.
Don't have them.
And so it's like, okay, no, we should be people that live with boundaries. But we should also be people that emulate the character of Christ and how we interact and how we disagree.
I think that's a good place to wrap up. That's a good word.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. This is it's a difficult subject. It's not something that is super popular to disagree well. I think, but I think there's value in it. And it's worth continuing to think about. And I hope that if you're watching or listening, it's something that it's a conversation that got you thinking as well. As always, if you have questions,
if you disagree with us.
If you disagree with us, just be nice about it. But if you have questions or disagreements, feel free to leave a message in the comment section of the video, or find us at discoverthegrove.com. You can contact us that way and just say, hey, I heard this on Rough Cut Faith and was interested if you would address this subject. Anything like that, we'd love to hear from you guys. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for being here. Bye.